A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. I never thought a simple time test could spiral into a living nightmare, but here we are, and I need to share what happened before it consumes me entirely. My husband, Aaron, has always been my biggest supporter, or at least that's what I believed until last week. With finals approaching, I dedicated a Saturday to prepare for my final exam, the kind worth a significant chunk of my grade. I set up in our small bedroom, a dimly lit space that was usually filled with warmth but felt claustrophobic under the pressure of looming deadlines. I had placed my phone on Do Not Disturb, drowning out the world, steeling my will against distractions, and I was well into a practice test when I heard the faint creaking of the door. I wasn't sure whether it was my mind playing tricks on me or a genuine sound breaking my concentration. I told myself I was just imagining it and pressed ahead. The clock was ticking. I could feel my heart rate sinking with its relentless countdown. Just as I reached a particularly tricky question, the door swung open wider than expected, and there stood Aaron, his face an unreadable mask. He didn't knock, he didn't even wait for me to acknowledge him. He simply walked in and, without a word, grabbed the empty coffee cup from my cluttered desk, which wouldn't have been a big deal under normal circumstances, but in that moment, it felt like the ultimate betrayal. I exploded, shouting for him to get out and that I was in the middle of an important test. The look on his face morphed into confusion and hurt, making me feel worse almost instantly, yet a primal anger surged in me, an instinctive need to protect my focus at all costs, and I didn't realize I had crossed a line. Aaron backed away as if struck, retreating without another word, and I immediately regretted my outburst. It was never my intention to hurt him, but in the throes of tension, I was blind to everything else. Shaking, I tried to refocus, but the heaviness of my guilt loomed larger than any countdown timer. When I finally returned to the living room post-test, my heart sank deeper. The usually vibrant space felt hollow, too quiet, with tension hanging thick in the air. "Aaron?" I called hesitantly, my voice a small echo against the silence. No answer. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. I checked the kitchen, the bathroom, and then the spare room, but each corner of our home held only emptiness. Panic tightened my throat as I grabbed my phone, ready to text him, but just as I was about to fire off a message, I noticed my notifications lighting up. The group chat with my classmates was flooded with frantic messages. "Did you hear about Aaron? I can't believe it, they were right near the corner." And then the most chilling of them all, "They said his car is gone." My heart dropped as a gnawing realization settled in. They were talking about the car accident in the news, and my mind raced with desperate images of a twisted metal heap, my husband a possible victim, consequences of his day spiraling out of control for reasons I couldn't fathom. I raced to the living room TV, where a breaking news segment flickered to life, reporters framed by flashing lights, and there was Aaron's car smashed against a tree, completely unrecognizable. They were saying something about speed, a reckless driver, and I felt the world around me shatter anew with every word. Somehow, I remained stuck in my own head, trapped between the anger I felt moments earlier and the fear gripping me now, unable to disentangle from the chaos I had already created. It was my fault. I had shut him out during a moment of sheer panic, blinded by my own selfish needs. I dropped to the floor, tears streaming down my face as guilt twisted into a knot in my stomach. What if he didn't make it? What if my voice had been the last thing he heard? I couldn't bear the thought. I grabbed my things and raced out the door, my heart pounding like a war drum against my ribcage as I sped toward the hospital, weaving through traffic with reckless abandon. Every red light felt like a ticking clock reminding me that I may have lost the only person who meant anything to me. When I finally made it to the ER, a haze of white coats and muffled voices surrounded me, and I stumbled onto a nurse who stopped me, her face a mask of professionalism that seemed utterly indifferent, and my gut twisted with urgency. "Please, where is he?" The nurse looked down and spoke carefully, almost as if she were preparing to shatter whatever shred of hope re-entered my heart. "You'll need to wait, ma'am. We're doing everything we can." I felt my heart drop into the depths of despair as the minutes turned into hours, each tick of the clock a cruel reminder of my own actions. The waiting area morphed from an ordinary space into a suffocating chamber of dread where guilt gnawed at my insides, replaying our last moments together like a broken record. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a doctor appeared, and my soul practically leapt into my throat. "He's stable," she said cautiously, "but he's unconscious. You can see him, but..." She paused, and the world around me faded out for a moment. "It's serious." The words felt like ice as I walked into the stark hospital room, seeing Aaron there, hooked to machines, wires snaking around him, face bruised and battered. Reality collided with my trauma, crashing into me with violent force. I approached the bed, heart heavy with emotion, wishing I could take back everything, shouting, turning away. I gently took his hand, squeezing it tightly as if my life depended on it. "I'm so sorry, Aaron. I never wanted this. I had no idea how much I needed you until I almost lost you." Tears continued to flow freely as I sat there, whispering to him, pouring out all the love and regret that had built up inside me. As days turned into a week, the fragile threads of hope began to weave through the darkness, and Aaron slowly started to regain consciousness. The first time his eyes fluttered open, dread coursed through me. What would he say? Would he hate me? I couldn't face that possibility. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't remember the fight, praying my words had reached him somehow. He turned his head slightly, squinting at the harsh fluorescent lights before his gaze fell on me, bewilderment etched across his face. "What happened?" He managed to croak, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of relief mixed with dread as I prepared to answer. This moment felt pivotal, but in his eyes, I saw forgiveness, possibly a reflection of my own guilt. Maybe he could sense the crushing weight of my regret, or maybe it was just the haze of pain killing every harsh thought. All I could do was nod and squeeze his hand tighter, letting the tears flow. "You got into an accident," I said softly. "You're here now. Just focus on getting better." We had a long road ahead of us, and in that uncertain future lay the lessons of a nightmarish reality, one that had shaken our lives and reminded me of the fragility of every moment we take for granted. It's wild how quickly everything can change, how a simple act of frustration in an innocent moment can lead us to the brink before bringing us back in character-shattering ways. It was in those darkest hours that I realized it was never about the test, but rather the love and understanding we have to nurture. Life is too unpredictable. I vowed never to take him for granted again. So, am I the asshole for shouting at him during a time test? I'm not sure if that label matters anymore. The moment I stepped into my classroom that dreary Thursday morning, I could feel a heaviness in the air, a tension coiling like a serpent about to strike, and as the morning sun struggled to filter through the grimy windows, my heart sank when I noticed a sea of students excitedly whispering in the corners, their eyes darting towards Sophia, a bright-eyed, hopeful 15-year-old with an infectious smile that often lit up the room. She had been dreaming of her quinceañera for years, a celebration of her transition into womanhood, and as her teacher, I could see the crescendo of her hopes building with each passing day, especially as she summoned the courage to approach me after class, a breathless determination etched across her face as she asked if I would help her plan it. My instincts screamed at me that something was amiss. Rumors whispered through the halls, hints of troubles at home that not even I, the well-meaning teacher, could unravel fully, but I nodded, a slight encouragement at the corners of my mouth. I agreed to help with the decorations and even promised I'd talk to the administration about allowing her to use the school gym for the event. Yet, as the days turned into weeks and the excitement around her quince spiraled into something resembling fairy tale hype among the students, I couldn't shake the growing unease that shadowed my heart, fueled by encounters I had with her family's financial struggles. When Sophia, glowing and radiant, approached me the following week to finalize some of the plans, I hesitated, the weight of uncertainty clutching at my throat, and when I muttered that I wasn't sure if she could have the quince due to potential issues stemming from her family background, the air thickened, her smile faltered, the color drained from her cheeks like someone had pulled the plug on her dream. A stunned silence fell over the classroom, the other students leaning in, wide-eyed, and I tried to clarify myself, to retract my words, but the damage was done. She turned on her heel and fled, leaving behind an echo of disbelief. From that moment on, I felt a shift. The whispers grew louder, not just amongst the students, but I could feel the chastising stares of the faculty, their judgment as corrosive as acid, speculating if I crushed a girl's aspirations with a careless comment. Days slipped by in a haze of regret, Sophia avoiding my gaze, her laughter replaced with a sorrowful hush, and just when I thought I might make amends, I was hit with an email from the school's principal informing me that Sophia's family had withdrawn her from school, effective immediately. Panic clawed at my chest. I wanted to reach out, to apologize, to let her know I never meant to upset her, but the digital void was deafening, a complete stop to all communication, and I was left to wonder if my offhanded comment had spiraled into something far darker than I could comprehend, until one night, after tossing and turning under blankets of regret, I received a chilling email from Sophia herself. The subject line read simply, "You were right," and as I opened it, I felt ice peel back the layers of my guilt. The email revealed that her home life had grown increasingly chaotic, her family struggling with unseen demons, her father losing his job, the celebratory dresses replaced with hunger pangs, and buried within the paragraphs was something that made my heart lurch. She wrote of a plan to reclaim her narrative, to find hope amidst the shadows that threatened to consume her entire existence, and as I read her words, the line blurred between despair and resolve, making me question my own role, my own cruel insensitivity, for I realized too late that my uncertainty had not only cast a cloud over her quinceañera but had transformed into something far more sinister. It had unwittingly exposed a fracture that ran deeper, something I never grasped until it was too late. The email concluded with just a single question: is there really a chance for me? The sorrow woven through her words struck me, coursed through my veins like a wildfire, igniting a desperation to reach out and guide her. But when I tried, my emails bounced back. Her family had severed all ties, pulling her from the world that had become too oppressive, too unforgiving, and it struck me like an axe splintering wood. My hope for her future had become twisted with every moment I'd let my doubts fester and grow, leaving me with a shrouded understanding in the silence that followed her departure. The echoes of laughter that once filled my classroom were replaced by an eerie stillness, and as I sat, the burden of guilt settling on my shoulders like a heavy coat, I couldn't help but wonder if I had not only become a stranger in her life but a ghost in my own, a cautionary tale of how a thoughtless remark, even in the name of caution, could chip away at the dreams of someone so young, trapped in the shadows of their own despair. All because I had been too afraid to believe in the chances that flickered like a distant candle, extinguished by my own doubts. Every year during summer break, my family and I head to our favorite lakeside cabin, a place marked by its tranquility and untouched beauty. It's always been a retreat from the chaos of life, but this last trip took a turn that still keeps me up at night. We arrived late on a Friday, just as a thunderstorm began to roll in, dark clouds brewing ominously over the mountains. My parents settled, and while I grabbed my backpack and headed to the rickety old pier, hoping to catch a moment of calm before the storm hit. As I stood staring out at the choppy water, I felt a presence beside me. I turned to see a girl, maybe a year or two younger than me, her auburn hair drenched by the rain, and her eyes wide as if she had somehow slipped into a different reality. Without a word, she motioned for me to follow her down the pier. Intrigued but slightly uneasy, I obeyed, as if bound by some invisible thread. She walked with a purpose until we reached the end, where the distance from land felt surreal, as if we were standing on the edge of the world. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice trembling. Just then, the sky split with a blinding flash of lightning, and I jumped, splashing into the murky water below. The last thing I remember was the girl's scream as I felt the cold envelop me, sinking deeper until everything went black. When I came to, I was gasping for air, my chest heaving as I clawed my way back to the surface. I looked around frantically for the girl, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. I pulled myself onto the pier, soaked and terrified, but a part of me felt something I can only describe as wrong, a whispering dread that knotted in my stomach. I noticed the weather had gone eerily calm, the storm clouds dissipating as the sun peeked through the trees. Shivering, I hurried back to the cabin, brushing off my encounter as a strange dream. The next morning, the sun shone bright, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as we went hiking along the scenic trails. It was there I overheard my parents casually talking about a little girl who had gone missing 2 summers ago, last seen near the lake. They said she had drowned, and with a chill, I wondered if this was the girl I had met. Later that evening, while my family played games inside, curiosity gnawed at me, and I slipped back down to the lake. The bright moon hung low in the sky, casting shimmering silvery light on the water, and I couldn't shake the feeling I was meant to be there. I called out, hoping to hear that girl's voice again, but only silence answered. Suddenly, I heard splashing, and then whispering. The whispers turned into chants as other shadows emerged from the woods. Their faces were obscured, and it felt like they were both there and not there. They pointed at me, demanding I join them in their fray, but I was rooted in place, paralyzed by fear. That girl appeared again, her face twisted in anguish, as if pleading for help, and I felt an uncontrollable impulse to step forward. But as I did, an unseen force pulled me back, and I resisted. That's when I heard it, a voice from the shadows, sickly and sweet, taunting, "You could save her, but it will cost you your joy." I couldn't understand, my heart racing as I felt the shadows drawing closer. Panic surged, and for reasons I still can't fully explain, I turned and ran, bolting back towards the safety of the cabin, my mind flooded with the realization that I could never return to the lake. The following day, my family checked out a bit earlier, perhaps sensing my distress. I kept having nightmares about that girl, about the shadows lingering by the lake. Days turned into weeks, and I convinced myself it was all just a figment of my imagination, a trick of the summer blues. But then came the phone call. It was a local news report about the lake. A girl had gone missing once again. She fit the same description as the girl from my summer. My heart dropped, and guilt washed over me, the kind that feels like a lead weight dragging you down. Could I have saved her? The thought gnawed at me, but deep down, the whispers in my head urged me to let it go, telling me I was being ridiculous. Still, I couldn't shake that eerie connection, feeling as if I had witnessed something I shouldn't have. My dreams grew darker, filled with shadows and whispers, and I wouldn't let myself swim anywhere near that lake again. As summer bled into fall, I tried to put it all behind me, but one night, while scrolling through social media, I came across a post that made my blood run cold, a photograph of that girl, smiling brightly, captioned, "Missing, please help us find her." Only this time, the comments were filled with those same shadowy figures from my dreams, claiming they could help, that they knew where she was. I barely slept that night, haunted by the thought that I had left her behind. And then, without warning, the shadows came back. They invaded every corner of my mind, filling my thoughts with despair and fear until the following summer rolled around, and my parents announced we'd be heading back to the cabin. My heart raced at the thought, and despite feeling unwell, I couldn't let my parents know. I had to face whatever darkness awaited me. When we arrived, everything seemed normal, no signs of the girl, just peace and quiet, the lake shimmering under a golden sunset. I convinced myself I was imagining it all until that very first night. I went for a walk along the pier and, as soon as I stepped onto the dock, I felt it, the cold breath on my neck and the whisper of a name, urging me forward. Ignoring every logical reason, I walked to the end of the pier, and there she was, emerging from the depths of the water, her pale face shimmering under the gathering moonlight, the shadows twisting around her sorrowful eyes. "Help me," she begged, her voice echoing across the water, and I felt my resolve crumble. I stepped closer, reaching my hand out, but that's when the shadows bubbled up, swallowing her whole as their whispers turned into a deafening roar. "You should have saved her," they cried, and I finally stumbled back, horrified beyond comprehension. My body felt frozen, my breath caught in my throat, as reality shattered. I dropped to the ground, overwhelmed by a flood of sorrow as my tears cascaded like rain. Suddenly, the girl emerged from the depths again, and she cried, but this time the sound pierced deep into my soul, ripping me apart, leaving me bare. "You let me drown," she screamed, her voice merging with the shadows. I felt like I was being tossed between worlds, lost in their twisted grasp. Finally breaking free from the haze, I turned and bolted back to the cabin, knowing that I could no longer live in denial. The next morning, I gathered my courage and confessed to my parents, hoping against hope they could help me understand, but they only looked at me with concern, brushing off my tales as a youthful imagination. They didn't understand what I had witnessed or felt, nobody ever did. Days went by, each one cementing the dread that had taken root in my heart, and when the time came for us to leave, I knew with clarity, I'd be forever haunted by that girl's anguish, an echo of guilt that would never fade. I boarded the car, every thought consumed by shadows, the whispers now entwined with my own thoughts, haunting me relentlessly. "You should have saved her," they taunted, their voices familiar yet alien, sending shivers down my spine, and as we drove away, I couldn't help but look back at the lake, the last vestiges of sunlight catching its surface, that eternal stillness reflecting a million stars above, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, a desperate plea to whatever forces lingered in the dark waters, "I am so sorry." But I knew then, it would never be enough to drown out the silence that followed. When I was 13, my family took me to visit my cousin Chloe, who lived in a small town where rumors wrapped around old houses like thick vines, and where the wind seemed to be a constant whisper of secrets. I adored Chloe, she was always the life of the party, brimming with laughter and confident chatter. But that summer night, everything changed when I ventured into the unfamiliar shadows of her house, seeking the solace of her bedroom, where old posters flaked on the walls and scented candles struggled against the oppressive humid air. Chloe's boyfriend, Tom, was there, and he wore an unsettling grin. "You should really see how easy it is to summon spirits," he said, a spark of something darker glittering in his eyes. I shrugged it off, trying to focus on the flickering candlelight, but his words festered, like a nest of wasps in my gut. Later that night, after he shoved a chair beneath the window and claimed to have called the dead by their first names, we gathered around the small table, Tom urging us to play a game, an innocent enough guise, but I could tell he was feeding off my unease. Chloe twirled her hair, oblivious to the dread crawling up my spine, but despite my protests, curiosity clawed at me until I felt I had no choice but to give in. As we joined hands in a circle, Tom began talking to the darkness, inviting any entity to join us, while a chill seeped into the room. A pressure hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as the candles flickered wildly and the temperature dropped. I shuddered, desperately wishing for a way out, when a flash of cold wind swept through the eerily still air, and the lights flickered, sending all three of us sprawling in panic against the wall. I thought I saw it, a shadow darting behind Tom, and I swear, for a brief moment, I could feel the breath of something unfathomable on my neck. "Stop it," I shouted, the pitch of my voice breaking. Chloe shot me a hurt look as Tom smirked, clearly reveling in my unease. I didn't like the way he looked at her, like she was nothing more than a pawn to be manipulated in his sick game. When I finally pulled away, running down the dimly lit hallway with pounding footsteps, I felt something cold and unyielding grip my heart, like the hand of whatever he had conjured. I stumbled out of the house, frantically kicking stones in the gravel driveway, determined to put distance between me and Tom's sinister antics. As I walked away, I lost track of time, my senses overwhelmed by the buzzing of cicadas and the distant murmur of wind slipping between the trees. I thought, foolishly, that I could shake the feeling of dread, but in the pit of my stomach, I felt I had made a mistake. By leaving, I had done something wrong. But suddenly, a loud crash echoed behind me, and I turned to see the front door swing open, Chloe stumbling out, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you leave?" she wailed, her breath hitching. I could barely form a response, the morbid reality sinking in. Before I could say anything, she yelled, "You made him angry." Confusion overwhelmed me as she explained how Tom had followed me, his demeanor shifting from smug to furious in seconds. I wanted to retreat into my own thoughts but couldn't. Her anguish was palpable, igniting guilt for a decision I'd made. "You shouldn't have played that game," she cried, her body trembling. Moments later, Tom stepped out onto the porch, his expression morphing eerily from anger to something chillingly vacant. "This is all your fault," he said, voice eerily devoid of emotion, before he slammed the door shut. It felt surreal, like being trapped in a waking nightmare, where reality began to fray at the edges. The sound of the waves crashing in the distance melded with Chloe's sobs. I attempted to comfort her, but it didn't help. It felt like I was trying to stop a tidal wave with my bare hands. What happened next is a blur. A strange stillness settled in the air, wrapping around us as if the universe itself paused to hold its breath. Chloe's phone buzzed violently, and she snatched it up, eyes widening. "It's Tom," she whispered, trembling. The heavy air thickened as she pressed the phone to her ear. I stood frozen, the world blurring around me as I listened to her end of the conversation. "No. Please, Tom. Don't say that," she begged, her voice breaking. When she finally hung up, her face was drained of color, a ghostly pallor that terrified me. "He's done," she whispered hollowly, and for the first time, I felt fear gripping not only for her but for what lurked just beyond the threshold of normalcy. It turned out that every time I left a room, every time I faltered, it incited a violent reaction in Tom. The shadows had answered his desperation. He wasn't just losing Chloe, he was losing himself, and in that moment, it felt like a dark loop had eclipsed our lives. I felt as if I had stumbled into a living horror story, where the protagonist's decision to run away from danger only served to amplify the horror for those left behind. Days turned into months, and Chloe would later describe that night as the beginning of the end. She could still hear him speaking in tongues, lost in the dark magic of old stories he shouldn't have touched, and somehow I felt responsible. It wasn't a clear-cut evil, no one died that night, but in her eyes, I could see the shadow crawl deeper, and I knew I had done something irrevocable. My heart ached with the weight of knowing that every sob escaping her lips felt like a piece of the blame sinking into my chest. Each encounter felt haunted, and every family gathering turned sour. The laughter morphed into daggers each time I saw Tom in the corner, wearing an expression of abandonment. He unleashed chaos in a white-hot rage, and soon after, their relationship crumbled, but the repercussions reverberated through Chloe's life like thunder. Was I really an asshole for leaving, or was it merely a breath before the descent into madness? It's hard To differentiate what's tangible and what's not when you're marking the boundaries of your sanity. While we navigate the dim corridors of our past longing for the light, sometimes the door you think leads to the safety of the outside world becomes the very breach through which darkness floods in, and the shadows inside you will haunt you long after you think you've escaped. I still wonder whether the real spirits were the stories we buried, too terrified to admit that they lived not only in the shadows of the night but eternally within us. I never thought a simple visit to the grocery store would spiral into my own personal horror story, but that's exactly what happened last Wednesday evening when I encountered a mother and her 8-year-old son, a boy who, at first glance, seemed like your typical kid but quickly revealed an unsettling darkness. I was just trying to pick up a few essentials, milk, bread, you know the drill, when I noticed the boy running wild through the aisles, screaming at the top of his lungs, throwing items on the floor like it was his own personal playground. His mother was oblivious, seemingly texting distractedly on her phone while he sprinted down the cereal aisle, knocking boxes left and right. At first, I thought it was amusing, maybe even a harmless little tantrum, but as I watched him shove a box of Frosted Flakes into another shopper's cart, laughter turned to unease. The slap of cardboard hitting tile echoed in the empty aisle, and I felt the adrenaline kick in as he turned to me with eyes wide and wild, a twisted grin stretching across his face that seemed far too old for a child. I glanced at his mother, expecting her to at least scold him, but she just kept scrolling, her expression blank, as if her son's chaos barely registered. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of responsibility creeping in. I approached her, a knot forming in my stomach. "Excuse me," I said, my heart racing even as I attempted to remain calm, "I think you might want to keep a closer eye on your son. He's causing quite the mess." To my dismay, she looked up, annoyance flashing in her eyes as if I were the problem. "It's just a little fun," she snapped, rolling her eyes and returning to her phone, dismissing me in a way that sent chills down my spine. That grin from her son widened, and I swear I felt the temperature drop. Left with no choice, I decided to confront the child directly. After all, children respond to authority, right? "Hey buddy," I said, squatting down to his level, forcing myself to meet his gaze, "how about we help your mom and clean this up together?" His laughter echoed eerily in the silence, and then he took a single step back, looking me up and down with a knowing glint in his eye that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. "You can't make me," he said, voice low and steady, way too serious for someone his age. I felt a chill race through me, a primal instinct to back off, but I pushed forward. "You'll get in trouble if you don't behave." For a moment, it seemed like my words had cut through the fog, and I could almost see the gears turning in his head. But then he just laughed again, this deep, guttural sound that echoed through the aisle, and I recoiled, suddenly feeling foolish for even trying. Almost as if the darkness inside him had risen to the surface, he spread his arms, as if preparing for flight, letting out a shriek so piercing it felt like it shattered glass. The commotion caught the attention of a nearby employee, who jogged over, eyebrows raised at the chaos unfolding before him, but as he stepped up to intervene, the boy turned and sprinted in the other direction, darting down the aisle and knocking over a display of snack cakes. In his wake, bewildered shoppers merely stared, shifting their bags and exchanging unsure glances. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, but I had no idea that feeling would soon become a reality. As the mother finally began to gather her son, I felt a tiny flicker of relief. Maybe she would see reason after all. But as she stepped closer, her face contorted in anger, she aimed her ire at me. "What the hell is your problem? He's just a kid." A deathly silence enveloped the aisle, and I could hear a pin drop as the other customers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between me and the mother. I could feel my cheeks flush with heat. After all, I was just trying to help. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just a typical grocery store visit anymore, it had turned into something much darker. "He's out of control," I stammered, my voice wavering slightly under the weight of her gaze. "Maybe if you paid attention." But before I could finish my sentence, the boy reappeared behind her, that same twisted grin plastered across his face, but this time, it felt like a veil of malice had descended over the air. "Don't you think she began, but the boy suddenly lunged at me, tackling my legs and causing me to stumble back, the world tilting as I hit the hard floor. My hands instinctively shot out to catch myself, pain sparking up my palms. Glaring up at the ceiling, I caught a glimpse of the kid running toward the entrance, laughter dancing on his lips, echoing in the empty space like a haunting memory. "Get him," I shouted, my voice hoarse as I regained my footing, but my cries were lost in a cacophony of chaos, the mother just standing there in shock, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. It was surreal, feeling powerless as the crowd around us erupted into confusion, and I felt a sick realization washing over me. I had crossed a line, had intervened where I should have simply walked away. With each passing moment, tension thickened the air, and soon, I felt the terror of this bizarre scenario settle deeply in my gut. Crazily enough, it all seemed to happen in slow motion. I dashed after the boy just as he slipped out the glass doors, the cool night air hitting my face like a wave of clarity, and my heart pounding in my chest as I shouted again, "Stop." He raced toward the parking lot, the glow of headlights flickering erratically, but just as I was about to reach him, a strange sensation washed over me, some primal instinct screaming to run away. And then it happened. I caught a glimpse of his eyes, darker than the night itself, seeming to draw in all the light around him, and I felt my body freeze, paralyzed in fear as if some unseen force was holding me in place. "You can't stop me," he said, the childish lilt of his voice twisted into something unrecognizable, and in that moment, I could swear I saw a flicker of malice, no, a flicker of something far worse, deep within him that confirmed my worst fears. This child was not just out of control, there was something inherently wrong with him. Every instinct screamed for me to turn and flee, to escape the darkness that threatened to engulf me, but I was rooted, lost in those eyes that shone with an ancient malevolence, an echo of something that should never belong in a child. I felt the wind whispering warnings to me, but the moment I finally turned to run, I felt a sharp pain straining through my back. Looking down in disbelief, I realized that the boy, I don't even know how, was suddenly upon me, and he had stuck a butcher knife into my side, the world swiftly fading into a crimson haze as pain engulfed my senses. Everything became muffled and distant, the screams, the sirens, the horrified gasps of passers-by became a bizarre symphony, swelling as I crumpled to the ground, the cool concrete cradling me as I gasped for breath, caught in an inescapable nightmare. As I lay there, eyes flickering shut against an abyss that threatened to swallow me whole, I could hear the mother call out to him, "David, come back." But her voice sounded far away, as if it belonged to another world. In my fading moments, my mind was a whirlpool of regrets, of could-haves and should-haves, realizing too late that when the line between innocence and darkness blurs, it is often the innocent who pay the ultimate price. All I started with was a simple commentary on parenting, and now I was just another casualty in a tale nobody would believe. I used to think conflicts in marriage were easy to resolve. After all, how hard could it be to express your feelings about something that's bothering you? But that was before the Fruit Loops incident, the night everything changed between my husband Eric and me. It began innocently enough. I was exhausted after a long day at work, and as I shuffled into the kitchen, I spotted Eric happily indulging in a massive bowl of cereal, the artfully vibrant loops smothered in milk, his face illuminated by the glow of the fridge light. I greeted him with a smile, expecting just a quiet moment to connect after a hectic day, but the atmosphere soured when I saw he already had a second bowl prepared, as if realizing he'd need it to satiate some insatiable hunger I didn't even know he had. My initial amusement turned to annoyance as he spooned a heaping helping into his mouth, the sound of the cereal crunching echoing in the dimly lit kitchen, like a cruel remix of my own spiraling frustration. "Are you really going to eat that much?" I asked, trying to inject a hint of humor into my comment, but Eric shot me a glare that poured ice down my spine. "What? It's just cereal," he replied, voice tinged with defensiveness as if I'd accused him of committing heinous acts. It struck me that maybe, just maybe, I was overreacting, so I shrugged it off and made myself a much smaller bowl, but the unease lingered like a ghost I couldn't shake. I sat across from him, and we could barely look at each other as the silence stretched, punctuated only by the clinking of spoons and slurping milk, hollow reminders of our widening disconnect. Trying to break the suffocating tension, I suggested we talk about our days, sharing a story about a coworker's mishap that had everyone in stitches, but Eric nodded in response, his focus unwavering from the bowl as if I were speaking an entirely different language. I could feel rage bubbling beneath my skin, a helplessness morphing into something primal, and I couldn't help but feel he was deliberately ignoring me. Finally, in a moment of clarity wrapped in a shroud of frustration, I blurted out, "It's kind of selfish to hog all the cereal, you know." Silence ensued. Eric's spoon clattered against the bowl, the sound sending a shockwave through my chest. "Selfish? You think eating a bowl of cereal makes me selfish?" he asked incredulously, his voice rising, anger twisting his features into something I almost didn't recognize. I was tired. Just because I want to enjoy my food doesn't mean I'm putting myself before you. The atmosphere became thick with unsaid words. I felt a reservoir of tears threaten to spill over, and I wasn't sure why I felt so shut out. My unease blossomed into outright confusion because it was just cereal, wasn't it? What did it even mean when we hurled accusations back and forth like cold cuts at a deli, the oddity of the situation spiraling toward an absurd conclusion? You're making a big deal out of nothing, Eric spat, indignant, and for a fleeting second, his ire glanced off my armor of hurt. Perhaps I was making a mountain out of a molehill. But then came a wave of bitterness that I couldn't ignore. Wasn't this about more than Fruit Loops? It was about our relationship, the chasm that had grown between us, countless nights of silence more poignant than words, several missed connections disguised as life's daily grind. I felt utterly alone in my desire to bridge that gap, a rhythmic pulse pounding in my ears as he continued to scoff at my words, chewing through each syllable as if they were the very cereal he deemed more important than our conversation. The bowl became a battleground as I accused him of being neglectful, focusing on superficial things instead of the underlying issues that screamed for attention. If I can't even talk to you about our basic needs, who am I to share my life with you? I felt raw, exposed, like a creature caught in the harsh light of his casual apathy, but he refused to budge, scoffing as he dug into another helping, the brightly colored pieces swimming in milk, blissfully unaware of the maelstrom of emotions swirling just a few inches away. I got up, slammed my bowl in the sink, and stomped toward our bedroom, where the weight of my words loomed over me. I slumped against the door, trying to catch my breath as I felt the tears tumble down my cheeks. Am I the entitled one here? The nagging voice inside me echoed as guilt washed over like a tidal wave. But rather than reflecting on my own pain, I wondered if he could truly remain indifferent while the world burned around him. This was more than cereal. It was the way he could eat so blithely while ignoring the hollow sounds of our lives barely touched by intimacy. Hours passed, my thoughts spiraled until they felt tangible, raw like a wound, and when I heard the soft patter of his footsteps creeping toward our bedroom, I thought maybe we could reconcile. But instead, Eric stood at the threshold, and before I could even summon a calm demeanor, he mumbled something unintelligible that sounded much like an apology but felt entirely hollow, just a way to end the night without earnestness. I could see it in the way he avoided eye contact, shame shimmering briefly only to collapse under the weight of his pride. I muttered something back, words soaked in resentment, and, in that moment, in that oh-so-ordinary kitchen illuminated with memories and the smell of fading milk, I realized this dinner was more than a bowl of cereal. It had come to symbolize everything gnawing at us beneath the surface, the inability to dig deeper, the hesitance to face what was truly wrong. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, allowing exhaustion to wash over me, yet sleep eluded as I replayed the events of the night like a reel in slow motion. In that ache of solitude, I understood something crucial. It wasn't about cereal anymore, it was about feeling unseen. The next morning was a chilly void of unspoken words. You could cut the tension with a knife as neither of us acknowledged what had transpired. Eric settled back into his routine, stepping lightly with precise purpose, brewing coffee while I poured cereal, determining to trudge forward despite the weight of resentment. Should I have bitten my tongue? Should I have just let him indulge? But beneath that question lurked a deeper one: was I wrong for wanting recognition? Days turned into weeks, and while practical matters continued as they always did, I felt the shift, how we danced around each other more carefully, like two actors performing in a play where the audience was unaware of the tension building offstage. I found solace in the quiet of night when I could replay our childish skirmish, flesh and blood memories tinged with bitterness, wondering if we were just prolonging the inevitable, forcing ourselves through to the end of a dull script. And then, one evening, as I flicked through Netflix in a desperate bid to create a new shared experience, I offered to make dinner. Maybe my gesture would be perceived as an olive branch. But after gathering ingredients and cooking a meal for two, I hesitantly beckoned Eric to our table, fiery lights dancing against the walls, and proposed we eat together instead of watching another episode without so much as a glance or a word exchanged. He looked up, reluctance flickering across his face as he joined me, but the table was a quiet battlefield once again, simmering words lingering in the corners of our postures. I couldn't hold back the flood anymore, all those hidden truths threatening to explode, the silence we'd sustained too long wrapped around our throats. You know, I called you selfish for a reason because you're not the only one hurting here, I said, heart racing, pouring out my frustration, and finally giving way to the aching loneliness I felt. His brow furrowed as if I had disturbed some old, long-buried pain. When he finally spoke, it was in a whisper laced with vulnerability. "I didn't mean to shut you out. I thought Fruit Loops would fill a void. I didn't realize I had created another." In that moment, I understood what we'd both been trying to stave off: the hurt, the apathy, the mounting discontent. But what terrified me more than the fight over a bowl of cereal was the recognition that maybe the things we felt compelled to fight over were only reflections of the storms brewing beneath the surface. And that night, instead of cereal becoming our destruction, it transformed into something unexpected, an offering of understanding, a chance to heal the wounds left festering in the shadows. We each took a slice of the truth, and through the darkness, the glow of hope started to dance in the periphery, a tiny flicker promising that even the smallest battles could become the beginning of something new. And as we sat there, spooning in unison, I realized sometimes it takes a bowl of cereal to really see each other again. Every Thanksgiving, I felt obligated to attend my aunt's annual dinner, a tradition that started before I was even born, but this year felt different, almost oppressive. It was a routine gathering embellished with family feuds and stories of past mischief, but a thick air of something ominous clung to the dining room. As we sat down, the scent of roasted turkey mingled with something disconcertingly sour, a smell I could not quite place. My eyes landed on the side dish Aunt Helen had brought, a massive casserole of what she called Thanksgiving surprise. Something about its texture, the way it glistened under the dining room lights, made my stomach churn. It looked almost like it had been reheated, the edges crisped just enough to hint it might have spent more than a few days in her fridge, or maybe worse, her basement. It wouldn't be the first time I had suspicions about Aunt Helen's cooking. Last year, I remembered swallowing dry turkey while she told me about her magic spice she sprinkled in everything, but nothing that magical came to mind when I examined her last-minute concoction. She caught me looking, her eyes narrowing, and suddenly a wave of guilt washed over me. "You're not going to try my special dish?" she asked. The way she said it felt almost like a challenge, and I felt trapped in the moment, everyone staring expectantly, utensils poised, ready to dive into their plates like eager wolves. I hesitated, a million thoughts colliding in my mind, the family outcast for not trying Aunt Helen's cooking versus potential illness. Instead of answering, I politely said, "I'm full." My lie hung in the air like the sweet potato casserole quietly baking in the oven, and for a moment, you could feel a collective shift in the atmosphere, a tightening of bonds that were already fraying, an unseen weight pressing down on us all. Aunt Helen laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh, it echoed strangely in the room, tinged with something unsettling. "Oh, sweetie, there's always room for family," she insisted as she scooped a heaping spoonful onto my plate anyway. I could feel my face flush, the need to say no battled by the pressure of familial obligation. My heart raced as I pushed the plate away, a plea to my mom for help dancing in my eyes. She merely shrugged, seemingly lost in her own food coma, and Aunt Helen's vibe shifted to something predatory. I was suddenly acutely aware that I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her cooking, the dish itself looking far too stale, too out of place, and an echo of horror rose up within me. She had a reputation for experimenting, especially with her more unconventional recipes. Trusting my instincts, I politely declined once more, repeating my mantra about being full, yet Aunt Helen leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "You know you can't not eat it. It's special, like our family." A chill ran down my spine, a clear implication that unwillingness wasn't merely an option. My plate, sitting there, so innocently menacing, suddenly became a focal point of dread, and I could feel the eyes of my relatives on me, their longing to see tradition upheld clashing with my rising panic. The moment stretched on indefinitely, Aunt Helen's expression morphing from a faux sweet smile to something that sent a tremor through my spirit, a frown laced with unyielding expectation and a hint of malice. Somewhere deep inside, I felt her frustration swirling like a storm, and I suddenly remembered stories, whispers, that Aunt Helen had experimented with unusual ingredients before, substances that could only be described as unique, maybe even dangerous. In a moment of clarity, I could imagine the casserole magically becoming the centerpiece of her questionable culinary adventures. Perhaps she had unearthed a recipe passed down through the generations, one made with something far too bizarre to be served at a standard family gathering. My stomach turned again as the fear bubbled over. I couldn't shake the image of her examining her creation in her dimly lit kitchen, the sounds of her cackling laughter dancing with the phantom memories of the dishes I had once consumed, turning sour and abandoned long before Thanksgiving. The tension broke only when my cousin Joey made a joke that landed flat, but the deflection only caused Aunt Helen to fissure. The silence grew loud and thick with unspoken words and unresolved emotions until she snapped, "You'll eat it. It's not Thanksgiving without my special dish." With each insistence, I could feel the pull of tradition choking me like a stranglehold, gnawing at my resolve, pipes of familial loyalty clinging to me as if refusing to let go. I felt the eyes of relatives proclaiming judgment, silently questioning if I would survive another year without indulging Aunt Helen's craving for pressuring me to devour it. One bite, I convinced myself, just one. Finally, I mustered some courage, my hand trembling as it reached for the serving spoon, and then I froze, caught mid-movement, my imagination racing ahead, scripting the silent horror play of what could happen if I surrendered, for what if the dish was made of despair? What if I, too, fell prey to the ancient recipe, consumed by whatever vile secrets lay within? "Aunt Helen, I just can't," I finally stammered, glimpsing the anger surging in her eyes before I reluctantly blurted out the truths I had bottled up. "I can't eat things that have been sitting around. What if it's bad?" The room went deathly quiet, tension crackling like electric current. Aunt Helen's face morphed from frustration to an eerie calm, a chilling smile stretching across her features. "Oh, sweetie," she cooed, and I think I detected a touch of satisfaction beneath that sugar-coated voice. "You have no idea what's good for you, do you? This recipe is an heirloom passed down through generations, a commitment of love and sacrifice." In my gut, dread swirled with pure terror as the world fell away, Aunt Helen morphing into an almost fiendish apparition desperate for me to partake in her eerie legacy. The air surrounded me felt apparent with sinister undertone, and every muscle in my body screamed to get away from that table as I heard the whispers of cousins muttering behind me, "Are you really going to challenge her? Family comes first." Just as I opened my mouth to scream, the lights flickered, and a horrible realization washed over me. They all seemed to be bound to this sick ritual, a cycle fueled by hidden secrets and untold sacrifices. Then Aunt Helen continued, her voice low and almost seductive, "You think we're all just here for the food, don't you? But it's the dish that binds us, keeps our family together through everything, including those who, let's say, didn't make it to the end of the feast last year." A cold shiver crawled up my spine, and a sickening clarity washed over me, a dark understanding fretting at my sanity as I envisioned an empty chair at the table, last year's dinner where a cousin had simply vanished. Was it possible that something more sinister was cooking beneath that surface? The thought propelled me to my feet, my stomach rebelling against me in scathing protest. "I can't," I screeched, the words pouring out of me like molten lava. "I refuse." I bolted for the door as Aunt Helen's chilling laughter echoed behind me, a sound I was convinced would haunt me forever. I rushed outside, my breath leaving me in sharp gasps and my mind racing, picturing the plate of Thanksgiving surprise, the voiceless screams it held, the lingering stench of something rotten that tainted not just the casserole but maybe everything about our family. I knew, without a doubt, that I couldn't turn back, couldn't be ensnared in whatever dark web Aunt Helen had woven, and I'd sooner fast until Christmas than find out just how far she would go to preserve her twisted legacy. I stumbled into the night, knowing I would be the family outcast in their eyes, but anything was better than feasting on the horrors of last year. As the darkness closed in around me, a thrill of freedom coursed through my veins, and yet, a lingering question remained, would I be the one uninvited next year, or would the casserole have its appetite satisfied before another Thanksgiving crept upon us? A few weeks ago, I found myself embroiled in a family feud that spiraled so quickly into something inexplicable, it still sends shivers down my spine. My cousin Amelia, who is a year younger than me, had a tendency toward excessive socializing, practically inviting half of our high school to any gathering we had, regardless of the time or place. But this year, Thanksgiving was at my parents' house, and after nearly 2 decades of noisy celebrations filled with the smell of turkey and pumpkin pie, I had my fill of her friends slumped on our couches or rummaging through the fridge, oblivious to any boundaries. So, when she announced excitedly that she was planning to invite her entire friend group over for Thanksgiving, I snapped. I told her she couldn't do that. "Amelia, this isn't a party, it's Thanksgiving," I said, my voice a mix of irritation and concern. With tears threatening to spill, she stormed off, muttering something under her breath, and I thought little of it at the time. Yet soon after, the atmosphere around the house shifted, as if a thick fog had rolled in uninvited. I dismissed it as the usual family tension, until the day before Thanksgiving, when everything escalated dramatically. That evening, I was alone in my room, scrolling through social media when I heard an unsettling sound, like the distant echoes of laughter and mingling voices, muffled by the walls. At first, I thought it was just Amelia, and maybe her friends had come over anyway. So I crept down the hallway, pausing at the top of the stairs, when suddenly, everything went silent, replaced by the haunting clang of silverware dropping to the floor. I think it's worth noting that it was almost midnight, yet the dining room lights flickered as if someone were playing tricks with the switch. Out of curiosity and more than a little fear, I tiptoed down, half expecting to find my family enjoying some last-minute preparations. To my utter confusion, the dining table was set for an extravagant meal, plates stacked, candles burning, but no one was there. A chill crept up my spine, and I suddenly felt like an intruder in my own home. I felt compelled to call out, "Hello?" But the words barely left my lips when I saw the centerpiece, a grotesque arrangement of wilted flowers, and beneath them lay a note in Amelia's unmistakable handwriting, "You shouldn't have done that." I froze, heart pounding, convinced it was some cruel prank. I backed away slowly, intending to bolt upstairs, but as I turned, I caught sight of something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow flitted past, quick and darting like a live thing. My instincts screamed for me to run, but I found myself paralyzed. It felt as if I were awaiting something profound. When I finally gathered the courage to rush back to my room, I slammed the door and locked it tight, hoping that would be enough to keep whatever I'd just witnessed at bay. That night, I hardly slept, plagued by uneasy thoughts filled with what festered between Amelia and me. The morning of Thanksgiving dawned gray and heavy, the air thick with an odd sense of dread I couldn't shake. As my family began to arrive, I tried to put on a brave face, forcing myself to engage in the usual small talk. Every now and then, I would glance toward the front door, half expecting a bustling group of Amelia's friends to barge in, but they never did. A creeping confusion and guilt gnawed at me as I remembered Amelia's tear-streaked face, that feeling of something undisclosed shared in those fleeting moments before she left. But when the dinner bell rang and we settled at the table, there was an emptiness around us that felt wrong. I hadn't noticed it before, but Amelia's absence cast a shadow over everything. Her seat lay conspicuously empty, and as the food was served, a hush fell over my family, like we were missing someone vital. I tried to swallow my unease, laughing at my uncle's jokes while the rest picked through their food absent-mindedly, eyes darting toward the door as if expecting Amelia to walk in with a smile and an entourage. But she didn't arrive. During a quiet moment, I ventured the question everyone seemed hesitant to voice, "Where's Amelia?" My mom stiffened, and the air soured. "She cancelled last minute," my dad muttered, eyeing me as if I were the cause of this mischief. A suffocating silence followed, and just as I thought the tension might snap, my younger brother piped up, "Hey, isn't that her car?" Our gaze turned toward the window, where the faint, unmistakable outline of Amelia's old Honda sat in the fading twilight. But Amelia didn't emerge from the vehicle, nor did anyone else. I felt a pang of worry shoot through me as I realized besides that strange note, I hadn't spoken with her since our argument. Just as I was about to suggest we check on her, a sudden shudder rattled the house, and the lights flickered ominously. For a heartbeat, everything went pitch black, and I could hear the muffled panic inside the house, my family's voices blending into a chaotic symphony of fear. When the lights returned with an angry flicker, our eyes found the windows, which revealed a reflection I'll never forget. There, pressed to the glass, was Amelia, her eyes wide and frantic, mouth moving as if she were screaming. But the sound, it didn't reach us. In that horrific moment, I felt something wrench inside my chest, a sense of cold accusation settling firmly in my gut. I didn't know what I'd unleashed by saying Amelia couldn't invite her friends. I lunged for the door, my heart pounding, but before I could escape, the house became agonizingly still. Drawing in a breath, unsure whether to feel more terror or dread, I realized something was terribly wrong, as if an uninvited guest had slipped silently into our home, something that lurked and stared from the corners of our lives. Thanksgiving dinner turned into a nightmare, family gathered around shivering in silence, while outside, the world was hushed, and the only sound was the echo of Amelia's voiceless scream. I never went outside that night. I was too scared, paralyzed by the unknown lurking just beyond the door. The next morning, without any explanation, they found Amelia's car empty and her gone, no trace of her anywhere. The police didn't find a single clue. As days blurred into weeks, no one ever spoke of her disappearance, and when I finally gathered the courage to ask my mother about her, all she would say was, "You shouldn't have asked her not to invite her friends." When Thanksgiving came around again a year later, the dread returned, settling on my shoulders like a curse. Amelia was gone, and I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, it was all my fault. Even now, as the holidays draw near, I can't look at the empty chair where she used to sit at the table without feeling an icy sensation clawing at my insides. You might think it's just the guilt, but deep down, I know it's more than that. Those shadows cast by our family dinners have grown darker, something unseen digs into my gut, festering with secrets. And even today, I still hear her laughter echo through the walls, diluted yet almost tangible, taunting me like a warning of what happens when you tell someone they can't invite their friends for Thanksgiving.